Hello there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Tuesday, September 20th. And here's some of what we're talking about tonight. Hurricane Fiona is a Category 3 storm and still getting stronger. We'll have the latest on Puerto Rico's recovery and the forecast as Fiona approaches Bermuda. The special master reviewing the Mar-a-Lago documents is getting to work. Former President Trump's lawyers appeared before him today. How's it looking after the first hearing? A Texas sheriff is investigating how a group of migrants ended up in Martha's Vineyard. Meanwhile, those migrants are suing Florida's governor for allegedly tricking them into going. Plus, the video game company behind Grand Theft Auto was hacked. We'll tell you why the FBI is now involved and what was stolen in the data breach. And we'll have the latest from Ukraine, including Vladimir Putin possibly laying the groundwork for a military escalation. Hurricane Fiona is picking up speed as it heads toward Bermuda. The Category 3 storm slammed into Turks and Caicos today. That island is still experiencing strong winds, rain, and flooding. Fiona has killed at least 5 people. Puerto Rico is under a state of emergency tonight. Some residents say they got more than 2 feet of rain and winds up to 100 miles per hour. Take a look at some of these images of the damage. Many houses were damaged. Some streets were completely flooded, and right now, more than 1 million people are without power. Some also don't have drinking water. Right now, the government says 300,000 customers in Puerto Rico have electric service back, but there may be a long way to go to get the entire island back on its feet. By the way, today marks 5 years since Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. Its governor says the lessons learned from Maria prepared them for Fiona.
Was the government here on the island prepared for this kind of storm?
Definitely. Much better prepared than when Maria happened.
Let's begin in Toa Baja. That's near Puerto Rico's capital, San Juan, and that is where NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is standing by. Gabe, the governor said that they are in a recovery phase, and you spoke to one young woman whose home was damaged in the storm. Here's part of what she said.
How hard is it now to not have power, to not have water? Mm-hmm. Where are you staying?
I don't know. We don't know. I think we just gonna start or trying to clean, but I don't know.
It's overwhelming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gabe, tell us more about how folks are doing tonight.
Well, Joshua, it is a devastating situation in many parts of Puerto Rico. We're here in Toa Baja, as you mentioned. Now, this is in the northern part of the island. And yes, the southern regions were the ones that got got most of the water, got most of the wind speed of Hurricane Fiona. But yet, places like Toa Baja on the northern end also were devastated. And this is some of what we saw today. These are belongings, people's livelihoods that are now on their front porches, essentially. And this neighborhood, much like so many other neighborhoods in Puerto Rico right now, Joshua, are without power and without running water. You may be able to hear the hum of the generator behind me, and that's the only way that this entire neighborhood could get power at this point. You can see it's mostly dark behind me. And this neighborhood, we were here several hours ago. Thankfully, the water has receded significantly. This is a neighborhood that flooded also significantly during Hurricane Maria because there's a nearby river that just rushes into these homes. The flooding was not as high this time around as it was 5 years ago, but still, these homes are destroyed, or at least the belongings are, of all the first floors here. We were in southern Puerto Rico. Some areas there saw actually more water from Hurricane Fiona than it did from Maria 5 years ago. Again, as you mentioned, Joshua, that anniversary, a somber anniversary today. Joshua?
So we heard you speaking to government officials saying that they are better prepared this time around for Fiona because of Maria. What do folks on the ground there feel? Do they share that confidence about the way that Puerto Rico prepared for the storm and about what the recovery might look like?
Well, Well, they certainly don't share that confidence, at least many of them, and many of those that we've spoken with, Joshua. And as you know, power in Puerto Rico has been incredibly controversial, not just since Hurricane Maria, but really for decades. This island has a long history of power problems, and it's been exacerbated since Hurricane Maria because back when that storm hit, it was a much more powerful storm in terms of wind speed, but the power was knocked out for months here in Puerto Rico. At the time, public officials stressed that things would be better, that they would learn lessons from Hurricane Maria. Many of the residents that we have spoken with, including some in this neighborhood, say that that simply has not happened. They are very frustrated by what they see as the failure to effectively rebuild the power grid following Hurricane Maria. Now, the governor says that, yes, the government officials are better prepared this time. Again, many residents here in Puerto Rico will believe it when they see it. They don't really believe that they will restore power here in the next few days, as the governor has said. And yes, right now, 4 in 5 people in Puerto Rico are without power. And the power consortium here that now handles power distribution on the island, you may remember it used to be an organization called PREPA that was run by the government that handled power in Puerto Rico up until last year, when a private consortium, Luma Energy, took over last year and started handling power distribution. Following that, there was widespread protests after many people said that their bills had gone up, that there were even more outages than before. So all this has been building to a lot of distrust against Luma Energy. Now, that consortium, for its part, says it is working hard to build back the power situation here in Puerto Rico, that they've already restored some 300,000 people. But Joshua, 80%, again, 80% of Puerto Rico right now is without power, and a large chunk of it expects to be for the foreseeable future, at least if you talk to these residents. And even more urgent, perhaps, than the power is the running water situation. And the governor told me yesterday that the water will likely not come back until the power does. So it's incredibly urgent right now, the situation unfolding in neighborhoods like this one that are going to spend another long night in the dark without power and without drinkable water. Joshua.
Thank you, Gabe. That's NBC's Gabe Gutierrez starting us off tonight from Toa Baja in Puerto Rico. Well, Hurricane Fiona is picking up speed. It could become a Category 4 storm. A Hurricane Hunter aircraft just reported that it is indeed strengthening. So let's check the forecast with NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns. Hey, Bill.
Joshua, we have Fiona, obviously a huge, potent storm. We saw what's happened in Puerto Rico as they begin their recovery process. They finally had some good weather today. Turks and Caicos Island today, it was their day. They had 100-mile-per-hour winds. They had about a period of about 12 hours where they had wind gusts between 50 to 80 miles per hour. So everyone was hunkered down indoors. The wind was howling. There is damage to be done, but we won't see till tomorrow just how bad it is here in the Grand Turk. So about 115-mile-per-hour winds, Category 3. You can see the little eye here as it heads northwards now at about 8 miles per hour. Now, where is the storm heading after this? It looks like it's going to head over some pretty warm water. And if the hurricanes are over warm water, often they can intensify. And we think this one has a chance of getting up to a Category 4 as we go into most likely Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday evening. So here's the path. And the first thing you notice is that it's well off the East Coast. We're going to see large waves, rip currents. Some of the waves and the swells coming in could be as high as 10 feet. So it's going to be very dangerous. If you go to the beaches, you'll see, I'm sure you'll see all the red flags out and telling people to stay away from the water all the way through this upcoming weekend because of the swells from this storm. So Bermuda, it looks like, is in the clear from this storm. Not going to get a direct hit. Maybe they'll get a little bit of rain, some squally weather, but they will not be looking at the wrath of Fiona like they did in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and also in the Turks and Caicos. But then look what happens up here. See this dark red? There's some very warm water where it's not supposed to be. In the North Atlantic, we're talking heading up past Maine towards Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, of all places. And we're thinking that this is going to be like a Category 2 equivalent storm by the time it gets up here. 100-mile-per-hour winds. It's going to be like a superstorm. It's going to be going from a tropical system to what we call an extratropical, almost like what Hurricane Sandy did. And this could be one of the worst storms they've ever experienced in this area. So we're going to have to talk a lot more about that as the week progresses. Now, other concerns that we have out there, I mentioned the waves, the dangerous rip currents. There could be easily, this is red, that's 40-foot waves. So all the cruise ships, all the shipping container ships, they're going to be getting out of the way of Fiona. We also have tropical depression version number 8 that is formed. That's a fish storm, not a concern for anyone. But then our eyes go down here. This is very much in the southern portions of where the storms will form. And in the days ahead, this is going to be drifting towards the Windward Islands, the ABC Islands here just north of Venezuela. If it's down near the coast, it may not develop. But a lot of our computer models do think this has a chance of developing, and maybe even significantly in about 5 to 7 days from now. And you notice towards Jamaica, and then that bend somewhere, Cuba, Mexico, maybe the Gulf of Mexico. We'll talk more about this storm, Joshua, in the days ahead. Also, that would be a concern if it heads our way next week.
It would indeed. Thank you, Bill. That's NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns with the latest on Fiona. Today, lawyers for both former President Trump and the Department of Justice appeared before a special master. Judge Raymond Deary is reviewing the documents that the FBI seized from Mar-a-Lago, and this was everyone's first in-person meeting. One key issue was the 100 or so documents marked as being classified. Some were marked top secret. Mr. Trump claims he declassified the documents before he left office. But the judge expressed skepticism about that claim. He called on the Trump legal team to back that up with a court filing. Let's get into today's hearing with NBC News legal analyst Carol Lamb. She is a former federal prosecutor. Carol, take us inside what both sides were arguing at today's hearing. Where does all of this wrangling start with the judge?
Well, this was the beginning of a lot of wrangling, and the Justice Department has been consistent all along in saying a special master is unnecessary in this criminal investigation. But really what they were saying is, hey, even if you're going to have a special master and you're going to have the special master review the 11,000 or so documents and items that were seized during the search warrant, this specific small set of documents, the 100 or so documents that were marked classified, should not fall into that category because these are clearly not privileged documents, attorney-client privilege or executive privilege, and they are clearly not personal belongings of the president or the former president. And so therefore, they should remain in the custody of the FBI, and the FBI should continue to use them in its criminal investigation. What Donald Trump's legal team is saying is, hey, it's possible that he declassified these documents while he was still president. We really don't know. And so, yes, not only should they be reviewed by the special master, but in fact, we should get to see them as they're being reviewed or before they're being reviewed so we can argue to the special master. What the special master has said is, hey, I don't operate on speculation. If you're saying that this man declassified the documents going out the door as president, then say that. But you have not actually said that. So he's really pressed them on this issue, and they have so far declined to actually say that Trump declassified these documents going out the door.
Can I just make sure I understand what you said? Because there's a little legal wrangling here in terms of the classification or declassification. It sounds like from what you just said that the Justice Department is strategically taking the president at his word to try to get access to the documents. That they're saying, okay, you said you declassified these documents. So if they're declassified, shouldn't we see them? They're clearly not privileged if they're declassified, so hand them over. And they're trying to kind of use the Trump legal team's strategy against them to get access to the documents, despite the presence of the special master. Do I have that wrong, or did I hear you correctly?
That's a variation on the theme. I think what's actually going on here is that courts don't resolve speculative issues. They don't say, hey, what if this were true? What would happen there? They say, tee it up for me. What is the actual dispute? And the problem for Donald Trump's team right now is if they say, oh, yes, he declassified these documents while he was president and as he was leaving the White House, that could later be used as an admission that Trump knew about these documents, knew they were being removed from the White House, and knew that they were being taken to Mar-a-Lago. His team does not want to make that concession at this point. And so what they have said to the special master is, we're not prepared to say that because you're forcing us to disclose a future defense that we might want to use. And so it's Trump's team that's being cagey here. They are saying we don't want to commit to anything, but you should somehow rule out the possibility that the president declassified these documents as he was leaving the White House. And that's simply not what the law requires. the government has done the correct thing here. So Trump's team filed 2 pleadings, or they filed a pleading in the appellate court today. And it is inconsistent with what they said to Judge Dearie, the special master, for a couple of reasons. But one thing they said was, hey, don't mess with the special master proceeding. It's going fine. This is just a brief pause in the criminal investigation.
Right.
This will all be resolved soon. Just a couple of hours later, they were in front of the special master saying, oh, you're going way too fast. We need to slow down here. We'll just check in with you every couple of weeks. And, you don't need to rush things so fast. So delay is clearly the object here. It's going to be interesting to see what Trump's team decides to do, because it's pretty clear that Judge Dearie, the special master, is sending signals that unless former President Trump's legal team is willing to commit to a position as to whether he declassified these documents, the judge is, it seems to me, inclined to rule against them.
Before I have to let you go, Carol, there was a separate amicus briefing today that was filed by 11 attorneys general of Republican states that accused the Biden administration of, in their words, ransacking a political rival. I don't know whether or not that has any bearing on this investigation at all, or how the special master or the judge in South Florida might view that amicus brief before we go.
Well, this was actually an amicus brief to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and it was a political move. It's a friend of the court brief. Basically, it was not solicited by the court. It was not. There was no notice that it was going to be filed, and it basically says, look at all of these other kinds of cases where the government under the Biden administration has failed to prevail in the courts, and as a result, you should not trust anything the Biden administration or its Department of Justice says, and you should just let the special master do the work that Judge Cannon wants him to do. It's really a political brief that doesn't go to the merits of this particular case.
Lots of legal wrangling to set the stage for all of this. Carol, I appreciate you walking us through this. That's NBC News legal analyst Carol Lam. Thanks very much. Still to come, we'll get into the criminal investigation into those migrants who were sent to Martha's Vineyard. What might this all mean for Florida's governor, Ron DeSantis? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News.
I think if you look, the folks that are contracted, not only do they give them a release form to sign, they actually give them a packet, and in that packet included a map of Martha's Vineyard. So it was obvious that that's where they were going.
Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis is defending his decision to send Venezuelan migrants to Martha's Vineyard last week. He maintains that they were not misled. But today, some of those migrants filed a class action lawsuit against Florida officials, including Governor DeSantis. They claim they were indeed deceived. The suit alleges that Florida officials, quote, intentionally conspired to confine the individual plaintiffs to the aircraft that transported them to Martha's Vineyard, unquote. Meanwhile, a Texas sheriff has opened a criminal investigation into the flight, including Mr. DeSantis' role. But the governor is promising more flights like this in the future. NBC's Emily Ikeda has more on all of this. Hey, Emily.
Hi there. Well, the battle over the border is building as a new criminal investigation examines the transfer of nearly 50 migrants to Martha's Vineyard last week. A Texas sheriff at the helm of that criminal investigation. He says a Venezuelan migrant was hired to recruit a group of roughly 50 people to partake in this trip. He says they were lured on with false promises of work and other kinds of assistance. There's also now a class action lawsuit taking aim and suing several Florida officials. I spoke with an attorney representing some of those migrants. He says they were used as political pawns. But Governor Ron DeSantis, who took credit for arranging those flights to Martha's Vineyard, is defending his decision, standing by his actions, and says the flights were voluntary. This all comes as we get new data from the government revealing a record influx of migrant crossings, all as the debate over how to control that number mounts up. Back to you.
That's NBC's Emily Ikeda reporting. We'll get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including fallout from the company behind the video game Grand Theft Auto getting hacked, an explosion in Chicago that caused a building to collapse, and the issues that matter to Americans on this National Voter Registration Day. Tonight's headlines begin in Chicago. At least 8 people are hurt after a 4-story building collapsed this morning. It happened after an explosion nearby. From our NBC station in Chicago, V. Wynn has more.
The ATF is helping the Chicago Fire Department with this investigation. They're all trying to figure out what caused this explosion in the 4-story building that injured 8 people. A massive emergency response in South Austin this morning after firefighters say an explosion blew off parts of the roof to this apartment building.
I was sitting on my couch, just, chilling, watching TV, getting ready for work. All of a sudden, I heard a boom.
Otis Manning lives right across the street from the apartment building near Central and West End.
My heart, almost shot out of my body. And when someone told me to look out the window, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ.
The explosion happened around 9 this morning. Neighbors describe what they saw and heard as horrific.
I thought it was like a terrorist attack because everybody was running out, screaming and hollering, and then people was coming out the building on stretchers, bleeding and everything.
The Chicago Fire Department called for additional resources and manpower as they begin to search the building, fearing many people could be dead inside. More than 135 firefighters and paramedics responded to the scene.
We had 8 transports, and that included 1 victim from across the street, a building across the street. Various hospitals, different conditions.
CFD says 5 men and 3 women are being treated in serious to critical conditions. Neighbors like Manning broke down while talking to us, just thinking about the victims.
It feels scary. My body never been shaken like this before. Whoever got hurt, I pray for their family. Whoever did make it out, God bless them.
The cause of this explosion is still unknown at this time. Meanwhile, the American Red Cross is helping displaced residents with a place to stay for the time being. A nearby church is also providing help. Reporting from South Austin, V. Wynn, NBC 5 News.
The company behind the hit video game series Grand Theft Auto was hacked this weekend, and now the FBI is investigating. Rockstar Games is one of the world's largest video game publishers. Its other hits include Max Payne and Red Dead Redemption. The hackers leaked dozens of videos from GTA's highly anticipated 6th installment. Also last week, Uber reported a similar security breach of its servers. The ride service company suggested it was hit by those same hackers, and Uber says the FBI is investigating both incidents. Let's get into this with Shannon Liao. She covers video games for The Washington Post. Ms. Liao, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know it's really early in the investigation and there's a lot we don't know, but how much do we know about the hack at Rockstar Games, particularly how it may have happened?
Mm-hmm. Right. So Take-Two, the parent company of Rockstar Games, has released a statement saying that an unauthorized third party did breach their systems, their servers, and was able to, get those videos of the unreleased Grand Theft Auto 6 game and footage that, are not ready for the public to see. So this hack, we don't actually know how the hackers pull this off. But as you mentioned before, Uber has said that it could be the same group that hacked them as well. And we do know that for the Uber hack, the group was able to, kind of spam an employee within Uber multiple times, asking for multi-factor authentication, and using that, the employee then granted the person access, and that the hacker was able to get into Uber's systems that way. But we don't know if they were the same methods used against Rockstar Games in this case.
I want to come back to that Uber detail about multi-factor authentication, because that's kind of stood out to me, but let me stick with Rockstar for 1 second. Talk about Grand Theft Auto for people who may not be gamers or may not be familiar with GTA, and just why this hack, leaking video from GTA 6 is such a huge deal.
Yeah, I mean, this is all that people could be talking about over the past weekend and across the games industry. Grand Theft Auto is it used to be the best-selling video game title in all of the United States. Now it's still maybe number 2, maybe knocked out of its place by Minecraft, but it is still a billion-dollar game franchise that every installment of the franchise is bound to be a hit. And we didn't even know that Rockstar was making this next entry into the franchise, but we had a feeling. And now, because of this leak and all the footage, we have a much better sense of what's coming in Grand Theft Auto 6. And it was not anything that the game developers were ready to announce at all. And so over the course of the weekend and the week, we've seen a lot of game industry folks go on social media, kind of trying to sympathize and comfort those developers working on the title, because it is probably demoralizing to see their work exposed so early.
Talk about the hackers who are suspected of being behind these 2 attacks. These are not the first times that they've struck major companies, right?
Right. Yeah. So with regards to that, they probably, so this is a group that's gone online to talk multiple times and claim credit for previous hacks. But I would say that's part of the tech industry coverage that is probably beyond the scope of what I've been covering. And at the same time, I did go back to talk to Take-Two and Rockstar Games and ask them if they could confirm that it was the same group that hacked Uber as well. And they said that they would not comment beyond their previous statement that they could confirm there was a hack and the leaked footage is real, but they would not confirm who is behind it. So all we can really say is the hacker claims to be the same group behind both hacks and previous hacks as well, but we don't actually know.
One of the things I had to get into with you about the nature of this hack, there are some that are kind of caused by very sophisticated computer programs. But in the press release, Uber laid out some of the details of their security breach. This part stood out to me. They said that the attacker tried to log into a contractor's Uber account over and over. The contractor got a 2-factor login approval request. That's kind of like where you try to log into something and they say, let us send a code to your email, or we're going to open an app on your phone. Click yes if this is really you. And then eventually, the contractor accepted one that was prompted by the hacker, and that's how the attacker got in. So it sounds like, for those of us who don't work in tech companies, there are some people inside very powerful tech companies who are just as gullible as the rest of us, and who can be duped by people who are just kind of playing the game, and they just poke enough, and they only have to get in one time in order to exploit these systems. Am I being too cynical about this? It sounds like the kind of hack that anybody could be susceptible to, and thus anybody could be protected from if they just keep their wits about them.
Right. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And, and keep in mind, it's a contractor for Uber, right? And Uber hires, thousands, if not more, contractors. So they are very susceptible to this sort of attack, because there are just so many people who could be receiving an attempt like this, like a phishing attempt where, a hacker is trying to constantly ask for authentication. And if you ignore all the attempts, then you're safe, right? But if you even let one in, then the hacker has now accessed the entire system. Most of the time, tech companies tell you to be careful with your accounts and to, have these multi-factor authentications for your accounts. But even if you have those systems in place, if you, then are approached by a hacker, unlikely but possible, then, they can still attempt to keep accessing your account, asking you to send in that authentication. And if you fall for those attempts, then obviously your account could be compromised.
Yeah, definitely a good reminder to go through, especially if you're on Twitter or Instagram. If you haven't activated it for your bank account, the 2-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, do it tonight after the show, please. Shannon Liao of The Washington Post, appreciate you talking us through the story tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here's something else you should do tonight after the show. Today is National Voter Registration Day. Organizations and companies across the country are rallying to get folks registered. Some are getting pretty creative. NBC's Shaquille Brewster has more on that from Milwaukee. Hey, Shaq.
Hi there. Well, across the country on this National Voter Registration Day, you have corporations, organizations, and even some campaigns grouping together their resources to encourage people not just to register to vote, but to also check their voter registration. You have Vice President Harris in South Carolina earlier today. In Atlanta, there was Ben & Jerry's handing out free ice cream in addition to voter information. And here in Milwaukee, there was a car parade encouraging folks to go out and get that voter registration checked. It went through the city for several hours. But I also have been talking to registered voters here about what it will take for them to get to the polls in November. What is animating them and motivating them ahead of the midterm elections? I want you to listen to some of those conversations.
My biggest issue is the right to life.
Women's rights to choose. That is number one for me.
Why is that so important for you?
Because it's my body.
Although I am a woman, like as much as I love the conversation surrounding us, cost of living affects everybody.
Everything's so expensive. Everything. Gas, food, especially food. Yeah. I work in 2 full-time jobs.
You hear a lot of concern about inflation and a lot of concern about abortion rights. And we got some new insight in our new NBC News poll that came out earlier this week about the partisan advantages that exist with those focuses. You see, Republicans do better on issues of inflation and the economy, on crime, and also immigration, while Democrats do better on abortion, health care, and education. Those partisan messages, that partisan advantage, is being felt when you watch the TV here in the state of Wisconsin, where there's that competitive governor's race and the competitive Senate race. Ads about abortion mostly are targeting Democrats, and you have ads about crime and inflation usually targeting Republican voters. It'll be interesting to see which one works, which message cuts through once we get to November.
That's NBC's Shaquille Brewster reporting from Milwaukee. Now, who you vote for, that's your business. But if you want to get registered, we can help. There's a QR code coming up on the screen. Just scan that, and it'll take you to our website, Plan Your Vote. It'll answer your questions about voting where you live. I'll give you a second to scan the QR code. Or, hey, if you're listening on the podcast and you can't see the QR code, just go to nbcnews.com/planyourvote. Up next, the war in Ukraine. Russians retreated from the city of Izum, but the devastation left behind is chilling. That's just ahead. Stay close. Tomorrow, President Biden plans to call out Russia over the war in Ukraine, but this time he'll do so at the UN General Assembly here in New York. The president will rally America's allies and push for more military support. More than 150 world leaders will be in attendance. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping will not. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, some Russian-occupied regions are holding referenda to join Russia. But will those votes mean anything? NBC foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald has more from Ukraine.
Russian separatists have said that they are going to be running these referendums in the next couple of days here. Now, basically what this means is that in Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine, they are going to allow residents there to vote on whether or not they want to be a part of Russia or not. The United States saying that the Russians are going to then fix the results. Bottom line here is we know that a recent poll that came out by the Kyiv Institute says that 95% of Ukrainians want to be a part of Ukraine. Also, this is similar to what we saw in 2014 in Crimea, when Russia annexed Crimea. But the difference here is that there's a full-blown war that's going on. Ukrainians saying they will continue to blow past the Russian front line. Referendum or not, they are trying to take back as much of their territory as they possibly can, specifically heading into these bitter cold winter months. Now, we had an opportunity to get into some of those liberated towns, speaking to people who recounted living in horror, living in hell, fearful of leaving their homes because they could be killed by the Russians, being deprived of medication and food. We talked to Doctors Without Borders in one town in the northeastern part of the country. I want you to listen to what she had to say.
But these people are very traumatized. They've suffered a great deal of humanitarian issues here, so we're still assessing the needs.
We also talked to residents who were tortured by the Russians, a man saying that they came to his house, they beat him, they stole his money, they stole his car. But in speaking with these people, they all had one thing in common. They knew that the Ukrainian military would come and liberate their town, and they know that Ukraine will be victorious in this war. Back to you.
Thank you, Megan. That's NBC's Megan Fitzgerald reporting from Ukraine. We are learning more about a gruesome scene in northeast Ukraine, and fair warning, these images might be disturbing. Hundreds of bodies have been found near the city of Izum. Russian troops left the area last week. and some of the bodies appear to be children. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin has the story.
The strategic town of Izum lies in ruins after the Ukrainians pushed the Russian forces out, ending their brutal occupation. The trauma they left behind, palpable. For 6 excruciating months, Ukrainian investigators say Russian forces used the town's police station as a prison and torture center, keeping some 40 Ukrainians at a time.
In this room, there are 4 people.
They'd have 4 people in this cell.
In this small room.
Chief investigator Serhiy Bolvanov shows us the horrifying conditions he says prisoners were forced to endure, some desperately marking the walls to pass the time.
9 days, somebody was there on this wall. You can see date, 29 June 22. This is named Lyoha. It's like Alexei. This marks God. Save us, Amen, and cross.
Ukrainian investigators say the prisoners were brought upstairs to be tortured, including civilians. He believes to terrorize the local population.
What goes through your mind as a human?
I'm a human at first, and when I see this place, it shocked me. I'm very scared.
Bolvanov says there's a link between the prison and the mass grave on the outskirts of town, where, according to Ukrainian investigators, they're exhuming bodies showing signs of torture. The Kremlin is calling the allegations a lie. Residents tell us most died from the relentless bombardment. Johan Krayev says for months his neighborhood was bombed. Missiles rained down from the sky night and day.
What is this?
It's shrapnel, he says. They were flying everywhere. Explosions were hitting everything. These are the scariest weapons. His wife, Antonina, shows us where shrapnel struck her arm and abdomen. The bombing was so powerful, their home was lifted off its frame. They had nowhere to run. All they could do was hide.
Imagine living in this basement for months. You have no phone, no internet, no electricity. In fact, this is your only light source. You're running out of water and food. At night, the explosions are so loud, you can't sleep. You don't know if your home will be the one hit next.
For half a year, that was the reality of the people who live here. But now, with Russians pushed back, people have left their homes, enjoying this moment of peace for however long it lasts. Aaron McLaughlin, NBC News, Izum, Ukraine.
Still to come, tax credits, rebates. How might the Inflation Reduction Act benefit you? We'll take a look in our special series, The Climate Challenge, before we go. The United Nations is gathering in New York this week with a special emphasis on climate. That's also our focus in an NBC News special series, The Climate Challenge. Tonight, let's focus on the Inflation Reduction Act. Among many other things, it contains a number of incentives for consumers to go green. The legislation includes thousands of dollars in tax credits and rebates. They cover purchases like electric vehicles, solar panels, or energy-efficient upgrades to your homes. We put a poll on Twitter asking which of these options you would most likely take advantage of. A few dozen users responded, so it is so not a scientific poll, but just over half of users chose tax credits for electric vehicles as their preference. About a third said they would upgrade appliances around the house, and 14% picked solar panels. So who qualifies for these incentives, and how much do they cover? Let's discuss that with Brahim Al-Husseini, the founder and managing partner of Full Cycle. It's an investment firm that helps develop climate-critical infrastructure technology. Mr. Al-Husseini, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Joshua. It's good to be here.
Let me start with electric vehicles. There have been tax breaks for electric vehicles for a while, and the Inflation Reduction Act tweaks those somewhat. How much of a difference does this new law make?
It makes a big difference because it really thinks through where these are most needed. Like, they don't apply for $100,000 plus vehicles for wealthy people, and it does have an income gap as well, as well. So they're going towards the people who need them the most in the decarbonization piece of the equation. So, for example, a brand new car, if the battery components and minerals are coming from the U.S. supply chain, qualify for $7,500 if it's a brand new car, and for the first time, there's $4,000 that of a tax credit that go to used cars, because a big percentage of Americans need to buy cars that are lower priced, and this way they can get access to used cars, which is very good for electric vehicles because they come with massive warranties. We're talking about 100,000 mile warranties, 8-year warranties. It's very advantageous to be able to pull that off.
And just to be clear, these are tax credits. These aren't
Correct.
Discounts. So you buy the car and then you can file that later and get that money back through your taxes, or how does that work?
It used to be like that. Now, once all of this is implemented, you'll be able to get it right at the dealership.
So it basically does work like a discount?
Correct.
Okay. All right. We did get a voicemail from a viewer in California, which has often led the way in electric vehicles, both making and purchasing. Here is what Mark left in our inbox. Listen.
My concern about electric cars is the power shortages that we have and outages, storms that knock out the power. We are going to have power to charge up these new cars.
Mark, thank you for that question. I wonder what you would say to him, particularly because we've been told with different kinds of cars over the years, like hybrid cars, that they kind of recharge themselves with the kinetic energy from braking. So how much does our changing power grid affect electric vehicles?
So a study just came out that says that our current grid can take up to a couple of 100 million electric cars plugging into it. Remember, electric vehicles charge at night. These are off-peak hours. The grid is not strained in the evening. And they're so smart, and they're designed to be so smart that if you and I owned an electric vehicle and we gave consent to our utility can actually tell them when to charge and when to stop charging. And in cases where the grid is really strained and we give consent, we can actually use the batteries in our car to push electrons back into the grid and make sure it's resilient and doesn't break down.
So if the power grid is knocked out in, say, an outage, like, hurricane season, I'm from Florida, and I'm used to having been without power for weeks after Hurricane Wilma, what do you do with an electric vehicle when the grid goes down?
Well, I mean, if you've seen the commercials for, let's say, the F-150 Lightning, you could literally power your house using your car for 3 days.
We also have these tax credits for solar panels. Those have also changed. Have those changed in kind of the same ways as tax credits for vehicles, or are the changes different?
They're almost the same, as they were in the past. Right now, you can get up to $14,000 in tax credits for your heat pumps, for your solar panels, for your low energy appliances, which is fantastic. Like I said, $7,500 for new vehicles and $4,000 for used.
We also heard from a viewer named Amy in California who kind of is expressing something that I think a lot of people express when they look at how individual consumers can go green, or at least greener. Amy writes, if you follow what most climate scientists are now saying about how far gone we already are, this bill is basically 2 steps forward and possibly 1.5 steps back. We must see far more dramatic climate action and think about our overall levels of consumerism and demand for energy. Amy, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. What would you say to Amy?
I would say that I understand Amy's concern, and she is right in the sense that we are reaching ecological tipping points that are irreversible and more needs to be done. But if you look at this bill, this is a monumental step forward for us. I mean, it literally lowers our carbon emissions 41% below 2005 emissions, and this is just at the federal level. So there's still local and state levels that can participate to get us to reach our Paris Climate Accord agreements. And, if you look at human history, when we're challenged, we always rise to the occasion. And if I was going to bet on whether we keep going down the road we're going or we're going to change the trajectory, I'll always bid on humanity.
So before I got to let you go, how much of this has to do with what we as consumers do as opposed to what world leaders are doing at the UN General Assembly this week? How much of this has to be done by world leaders?
I mean, a big piece of it has to be done by world leaders, because if you look at this bill, and thanks to the authors of the bill and the lawmakers that passed it, they've created an environment where the entire industry and the investment community is coming together to take advantage of these incentives so we can transition from a high carbon to a low carbon economy, and they made that possible. It just needs to happen in every nation now.
Brahim Al-Husseini, founder and managing partner of Full Cycle. So much in this bill, and I appreciate you talking it through with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
An illegal gold mine is creating something of an environmental crisis in the Amazon. Its effects are showing up far beyond the rainforest. An NBC News investigation uncovered this in partnership with the Pulitzer Center's Rainforest Project. NBC's Cynthia McFadden takes us inside Peru.
Tonight, the Amazon, critical to a healthy planet, is in peril. We travel to the emergency zone in Peru.
What happens in the Amazon doesn't just stay in the Amazon.
Professor Miles Silman has studied the Amazon for all of his professional life. He says the biodiversity here in Peru affects weather patterns, crop growth, and even carbon levels, which is why gold mining here is having enormous worldwide consequences.
How bad is it? It's pretty bad. It's much worse than we had feared.
Luis Fernandez is one of the world's leading experts on mercury. He explains that here in the Amazon, pure 24-karat gold is extracted by using barrels of mercury, which separates the gold from the sludge. Mercury is poison, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's poisonous to humans, to wildlife. It actually persists. It doesn't break down. It lasts for centuries.
6 years ago, the two Wake Forest professors created a not-for-profit, Cincia, dedicated to better understanding and then helping heal this place, which has gone from a vital resource in absorbing the world's carbon to one that pumps ever more carbon into the atmosphere.
The first meter of soil in the forest holds as much carbon as all the trees that are above it. And then when we think about the next meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters, there can be a whole other forest's worth of carbon down that deep.
Are you suggesting that if we dig down there, we may be releasing all of this old carbon into the atmosphere?
Not suggesting, we really are.
It's carbon leaving the Earth and entering the atmosphere that is the primary greenhouse gas contributing to climate change. The ecological effect has been devastating. More than 370,000 acres of protected forest have been turned into this by mining. Desert, dotted by pools contaminated by mercury. In the region, millions of acres have been lost. And here's the catch. Gold mining with mercury is legal in Peru, but not on protected lands. And it is this illicit mining that pumps more than $3 billion worth of unaccounted for gold out of Peru every year, much of it headed to the U.S. What's fueling this gold rush? Money. The price of gold in 2007 was about $700 an ounce. Today, it's worth more than twice that much. Little wonder various transnational cartels and paramilitary groups have gotten involved, some now making more money trafficking illegal gold than drugs. The situation is seen as so dangerous that the U.S. military has stepped in, providing intelligence to the Peruvian government. This is just the beginning of a massive destruction.
Así es.
NBC News is the first U.S. television network Peruvian Special Forces has permitted to embed with them since the pandemic. They're in charge of this area. It's called La Pampa.
Victoria! Viva!
This is not just an environmental disaster. It's also a real question of national and international security.
Así es.
The Peruvian government declared a state of emergency here, which is still in effect, and launched Operation Mercury 3 years ago. They successfully pushed 25,000 miners out of La Pampa. Despite it all, Silman and Fernandez are hopeful. They've made strides in their reforestation work, figuring out what can be replanted, the largest such enterprise in the Americas.
That's a beauty.
This is called Caliandra. It's a legume, and it's a survivor.
This was all desert a few years ago, but with their help and a little push from Mother Nature, it's coming back.
Nature always heals itself. It just depends on how long it takes.
Well, if we don't mess it up too much.
The problem with talking to a biologist is I'm thinking nature heals itself on the scales of like asteroids killing dinosaurs and things like yeah, sorry.
Realizing that the Amazon doesn't have that kind of time, the battle to save it continues as the destruction rages on. Cynthia McFadden, NBC News, La Pampa, Peru.
Hey, thank you for making time for us. During the show, I got a message on Twitter from a viewer whose father is in Puerto Rico. I hope your father's all right with the aftermath of Hurricane Fiona. Would love to hear from more of you about the hurricane or anything we've discussed tonight. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. You can leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for us, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.